All right, so have you heard about this BYD, this Chinese car company? They're like the biggest electric vehicle maker in the world now.
Wow.
I know, right? They've sold more EVs than Tesla.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
It really makes you think about how things are changing so fast in the car world.
It absolutely does. Yeah, it's like a real shakeup in the industry.
For sure. And it brings up a lot of questions too, especially when we look at, what's happening here with car making and trade in the US,
Right.
which is exactly what we're going to dig into today. We're doing a deep dive into what Trump's tariffs mean for the car industry, what the current state of cars in the US looks like, and how China's growing strength with, companies like BYD is kind of leading this charge could affect us and our neighbors down in Mexico.
Right.
We'll be discussing politics, current events, and how it'll affect you not only in your life, but during your vacation time. Be sure to click the button, boot the bell, subscribe, all the things.
We've got a really interesting set of sources lined up for you today. We've got a YouTube analysis that breaks down BYD's crazy fast growth and all the trade tensions involved.
Interesting.
Yeah, an article that points out some key advantages BYD seems to have over American automakers.
Okay.
And then we're going to look at the top questions that consumers like you are asking about these tariffs. Plus, we've got some insights from the Cato Institute about the potential downsides of these tariffs, for us as buyers and for the whole U.S. car market.
So a lot to unpack.
Yeah, so our goal today is to take all this information, about tariffs, global competition, and really try to make it clear what it means for how cars are built, how much they cost, and what the future of this whole industry might look like, both here and in Mexico.
Sounds good.
Okay, so let's just jump right in and talk about BYD first.
Okay.
Becoming the world's top EV producer, that's a huge deal.
Yeah.
And you start to see how they did it, and it gets really fascinating.
Yeah.
Affordability seems to be a major factor in their success. I mean, their Seville model starts at around $11,000.
Wow.
I know. Think about that for a second. 11 grand for a brand new electric car.
That's unheard of.
Right. Compare that to the average EV in the US, which is about $55,000.
Right.
Or even a Tesla Model 3 at almost $40,000. That's a huge difference.
It is a huge difference.
When you think about buying your next car, does a price difference like that change what you'd even consider?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think for a lot of people, that would be a deciding factor.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, though, how does BYD make these cars so affordable?
Yeah, and that's what's so interesting. It's not just one thing. It's a combination of smart strategies.
Yeah.
From what we read, they have incredible economies of scale, because they're just producing so many vehicles that their per unit cost goes way down.
Right.
And then they're what's called vertically integrated.
Right.
Think of a restaurant that grows its own vegetables. They can control the cost and the quality from start to finish.
Makes sense.
So BYD making their own batteries, which is a huge expense in electric vehicles, gives them a similar advantage.
Right.
And that translates to those lower prices we're talking about.
Gotcha.
And then you look at their factories, which are on another level.
Really?
Yeah, this article we read described them as super automated,
Wow.
using robots, AI, machine learning to fine-tune everything, from welding to the paint job.
Oh, wow.
It really paints this picture of super efficient and smart operations.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder if some of the older manufacturing, processes in other parts of the world are kind of struggling to keep up.
Right. And it seems like that's what the YouTube analysis was getting at, too. Highlighting how advanced and integrated their factories are.
Yeah.
And they even suggested that they might be more efficient than some of the leading manufacturers.
Interesting.
And it's not just about building cars faster. It's also about maintaining that high quality, reducing waste.
Absolutely. So all this leads to something really interesting, especially when you think about what you might want in your next car.
Right?
The technology,
Right.
apparently BYD just rolled out new self-driving tech.
Wow.
Powered by Chinese AI chips.
Okay.
And get this, it's free on all their models.
That's a big deal.
I know. And the fast charging breakthrough they've achieved sounds like a game changer for anyone who's ever worried about EV range,
Right?
We're talking 400 kilometers of range with just a 5-minute charge.
Really?
Yeah, Tesla, by comparison, is only at 280 kilometers in 15 minutes.
That's a huge difference.
Imagine plugging in your car for just the time it takes to grab a coffee and getting enough range to drive for hours.
Yeah, that's incredible.
That's the kind of convenience their tech is promising.
Right?
And it's supposed to be coming out in April, right around the corner.
Wow, so they're moving fast.
They are, and it makes sense why China's being so protective of this tech now.
Yeah.
The YouTube video talked about that, the fear that the U.S. might get access to it,
Right.
especially with that potential BYD plant in Mexico.
Right.
That's actually a big reason why those approvals have been delayed.
Interesting.
Yeah, it shows you how economic decisions are tied to these like broader strategic concerns.
Absolutely.
Which brings us to Trump's tariffs.
Okay.
So right now, Chinese EVs entering the U.S. face a 120% import tax.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a bunch of different tariffs combined over time.
Okay.
Some experts are calling it an effective block to the U.S. market.
I see.
So one of the biggest questions people are asking is about the impact of these tariffs.
Yeah.
Like, will they actually create jobs here in the U.S., or are they just going to make cars more expensive for us?
That's the big question, right?
Yeah. What are your initial thoughts on that? Like, how do you think this will actually play out for the average car buyer?
Well, I think that's the central tension here, right? Tariffs are meant to make imported goods more expensive.
Right.
So theoretically, that should encourage consumers to buy American-made goods,
Right.
which would boost manufacturing here and create more jobs.
Yeah.
But the Cato Institute's analysis, and a lot of economists argue, that tariffs actually end up acting as a tax on consumers.
Okay.
They lead to higher prices without really guaranteeing that manufacturing will shift or that new jobs will be created, especially in industries like the car industry, where everything is so global.
Right. It's complicated.
It is.
And that leads to another question that's on a lot of people's minds.
Right.
If the goals here is to get companies like Ford and GM to, start building more cars here in the U.S. instead of in Mexico, why not just work directly with those companies? Like, why not talk to the CEOs instead of imposing these broad tariffs?
Yeah, I mean, tariffs are a pretty broad tool. They impact the whole market, not just specific companies or locations.
Right.
So direct negotiations or offering incentives could be a more precise way to get the results they want. But those approaches have their own problems too.
Yeah, like what?
Well, they can get really complex, and there's always the potential for political influence to get in the way.
I see.
It's a tricky situation.
It is. It makes you think about consumer choice, too.
Yeah.
That's another thing people are asking about.
Okay.
Shouldn't people have the freedom to choose where their cars are made based on what they decide to buy?
Right?
And shouldn't market competition, not tariffs, decide what products are available?
Yeah, those are good points.
It feels like these tariffs are taking away those choices.
Yeah, I mean, in a free market, the idea is that consumer demand and competition between companies should drive innovation and efficiency.
Makes sense.
But tariffs kind of mess with that natural flow.
Yeah.
They might protect some domestic producers who aren't as efficient from competition,
Right.
and that can limit the choices consumers have, maybe preventing them from getting better or more affordable options.
Right. And what about the role of the companies themselves?
Good point.
People are asking about that too. Like, if the shareholders in these big American car companies really wanted more manufacturing to happen here in the U.S.,
Yeah.
wouldn't they be pushing for that already? Without the government needing to step in with these tariffs.
It's a valid question. I mean, companies are often driven by a lot of different factors.
Like what?
Well, shareholder returns are a big one.
Of course.
And then there's cost efficiency and just keeping up with market demand.
Right.
They might want to do more manufacturing here, but it has to make sense financially.
Yeah.
Tariffs are meant to make that calculation work out differently.
Okay.
But it's not clear whether that will be good for shareholders in the long run or whether it will actually benefit consumers.
I see. So here's a really big question for anyone thinking about buying a car.
Okay.
How will these tariffs on foreign-made cars actually affect the prices of American-made cars?
Right.
Will we just end up paying more for all cars?
That's a concern a lot of people have.
It is. Will we pay more no matter where the car is actually assembled?
Well, economic theory suggests that when you have less competition,
Yeah.
prices tend to go up across the board.
Okay.
So if there are fewer affordable foreign cars on the market because of these tariffs,
Right.
American companies might not have to keep their prices as low.
I see.
So, yeah, it's very possible that consumers could end up paying more for old cars.
Right. Regardless of where they're made.
Exactly.
And this next question really highlights that whole price difference issue we talked about with BYD.
Okay.
Like, why would someone logically choose to pay $50,000 or more for a U.S.-made EV
Yeah.
if they could get a similar car from overseas for way less?
Right.
If it weren't for the tariff?
That's a good question.
It really shows the challenge these tariffs create for consumers.
It does. Affordability is a huge factor for most car buyers.
Absolutely.
And if there's a big price difference, it's hard for tariffs alone to change people's minds.
Yeah.
Especially if the American-made option doesn't offer the same features or technology for the price.
Exactly. And here's a thought that's kind of worrying.
Okay.
Some people are wondering if these tariffs could actually end up hurting American auto workers.
How so?
Well, if the higher prices lead to fewer cars being sold overall,
What?
that could mean less work for the people building those cars.
Yeah, that's a good point. Sometimes these protectionist measures can have unintended consequences.
Yeah,
They can actually hurt the very people they're supposed to help.
right. It's a valid concern. So that brings up another question.
Right.
Are there other ways to boost car manufacturing in the U.S. besides tariffs?
Like what?
Well, some people are suggesting things like tax incentives for companies
Okay.
or making sure American workers get paid better wages.
Right, those are definitely options worth considering.
Yeah,
Tax incentives can encourage companies to invest and produce more here,
right,
and higher wages can help attract and keep skilled workers.
right.
Those approaches are about making the U.S. a more competitive place for manufacturing,
Yeah.
but they don't punish consumers with higher prices or risk starting trade wars with other countries.
That makes sense. And finally, the big picture question.
Okay?
What happens if these tariffs lead to a bigger trade war with other countries?
Yeah,
Could we end up seeing higher prices on everything?
it's a possibility.
Not just cars, but electronics, clothing, even groceries.
It's a ripple effect.
Right, and that's concerning.
It is. Trade wars are unpredictable.
Yeah,
They can have consequences that go way beyond the industries you're targeting at first.
right.
If the cost of imported goods goes up, even those not directly affected by tariffs,
Yeah,
that can impact the whole economy, potentially lead to inflation,
right.
which hurts everyone.
Exactly. So, thinking about all these questions really gives you a sense of how complex these tariffs are.
For sure.
They're not just some abstract economic policy.
Right.
They have a very real impact on what cars you can buy, how much you'll pay for them,
Yeah.
and even the broader economy.
And that brings us to a final thought for you to consider.
Okay.
We've talked about all these questions about tariffs and
Yeah.
how the global car industry is changing.
Right.
So thinking about all that, what do you see as the most important factor that will affect your next car buying decision?
Good question.
And with all these economic and geopolitical forces at play, what role do you think policies like tariffs will ultimately have in shaping the future of the cars we drive here in America?
It's a really complex issue.
It is.
And your perspective as a consumer is a really important part of it.
Absolutely.
So we'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
It's been really interesting talking about all this with you.
Likewise.
And we'll see you next time.
Sounds good.